Some say the valley itself asked a question long before men named it. What is the strength that neither swells nor withers? In the hush before dawn, a young soldier stood at the lip of the valley, hearing that riddle in the wind and feeling that question settle in his chest, and he wondered whether the answer would demand fire or stillness. He stepped in, curious for an answer. He was called Kiran, not for fame, but because his light was small and steady, the kind that finds stones on a dark path and keeps travelers from stumbling. It is told that he neither shouted the loudest in camp nor hid behind others when danger came. People noticed that he ate when hungry, rested when tired, and kept his spear sharp without hoarding it in a chest of gold. This quiet order drew both respect and mild puzzlement. He moved deeper into the valley to learn whether steadiness could answer the riddle he heard, and so he walked on. Word spread of two nearby lords who embodied opposite truths. One gathered riches until his halls sagged under gold, and his men grew soft. The other tempered himself into ascetic discipline until his warriors were brittle and lonely, ready to snap at the first gust. Both lords sought Kiran for their own reasons, one to add reliability to his hoard, the other to forge an absolute instrument of war. And messengers came wrapped in silk and leather with promises and warning. Kiran listened without decision, sensing that both voices contained part of the valley's riddle, and he waited for Febdman. The Lord of Surplus sent his steward with a satchel of coin and a smile, saying he would make Kiran commander if he traded carefulness for conquest and let fortune buy him comforts that would dull him to pain. The ascetic lord sent a pale envoy who promised purity, urging Kiran to cut all ties and become a sharpened blade that bends to no desire. Kiran accepted neither gift immediately, feeling in his bones that a middle step existed, but uncertain of its measure, and the valley watched as patience stretched like a rope between two fires. He chose to watch both court in Fert's need and Emiel. Kiran visited the Lord of Surplus and walked among halls where gold pooled like water and cooks burned entire trees to feed endless feasts, and he watched soldiers who had never bled train with blunt weapons in soft yards. The steward promised safety and a future built on abundance, but Kiran saw men whose eyes had grown small from wanting always more, and he felt a quiet alarm in his chest that abundance can breed an appetite for excess. He left the glittered court with his spear as clean as before, unsettled but wiser, and he walked toward the other truth. At the austere keep, he found candles for every footstep, and soldiers who woke to chant and fasted until bones edged like knives, and they trained until their joints ached, but their hearts had little laughter left. The pale lord praised discipline and loathed indulgence, arguing that a warrior must be a blade honed free from all softness. Yet Kiran watched men whose hands trembled not from fatigue, but from the absence of warmth. He felt pity for their single-mindedness and left with a deeper question: how to hold discipline without becoming brittle, and how to hold comfort without losing purpose. He carried that quaid, that moss coin. Between the keeps, a market gathered where traders hawked stories as much as grain, and here Kiran heard whispers that the valley itself would soon be claimed by an outside warlord who wanted both gold and obedience. Merchants argued that only extravagance could buy victory, and monks insisted that only ascetic resolve could withstand siege, and each voice pulled at the edges of the soldier's steady light. Kiran weighed these claims like stones on a scale, aware that the coming choice would not be a thought experiment, but a test that could break men, and he prepared to return to his camp to ready what he could. That night, Kiran sat by a small fire and measured what he needed: enough food to steady a body, a night's sleep to keep his mind, coin to help a friend, and time to teach his men to keep spears sharp and hearts steady. He decided against the extremes and vowed instead to practice the middle path, neither to hoard nor to starve the spirit, but to temper desire with wisdom. Some say his choice was small and invisible, others that it was the first true defiance of the valley's violent temptations. Yet it set him on a course where each simple decision be a battle of its own. He rose what its deployed. Would at! The warlord came like a low storm, banners like thunderclouds, and a tide of hardened men who had learned to take for themselves, and the valley braced for breaking. The lords of Plenty and of Ash both readied their forces with their chosen methods, expecting those extremes to win the day. Kiran marshaled a small band who had learned his middle measures, enough training to be skilled, enough rest to stand long, enough food to remain calm, and they stood between the tents as the first banners the sky. The clash was near the valley. The soldiers of the House of Plenty charged with drums and bright armor, but their bellies heavy with feasts and their reflexes dulled by comfort, they faltered when the first arrow found flesh, and confusion spread like a sickness among them. Their leaders called for gold and spectacle to inspire courage, but gaudy armors mistook weight for strength, and that weight became a liability, dragging men down where they might otherwise have stood. Kiran watched as abundance turned into brittle complacency, and he guided his men to take advantage of opens by the falter, not to gloat, but to hold the line where needed. At the same time, the ascetic warriors, trained to deny every comfort, charged like tight springs and carved deep in the first turn. But without rest, their joints locked, and their rage became a blind edge that could not adapt to change. Their leaders' insistence on perfect form refused to bend, and when the enemy adjusted their tactics, the austere ranks snapped like glass, brilliant but shattered, leaving jagged wounds and lost ground. Kiran saw that unbending purity could achieve brief glory, but not endure the messy human needs of a long clash, and he tightened his breath to pertori. Kiran ordered his men through maneuvers that were neither showy nor ascetic. They shifted formations to cover the weary, passed water quickly where thirst threatened, and used precise strikes instead of reckless charges, each action measured for the moment rather than for legend. They traded neither all of their comforts nor every pleasure. Instead, they allocated warmth, rest, and ration where it preserved strength, and they sharpened their spearwork not to display, but to sustain, moving like a single patient. Some say the army of the valley had never seen such steadiness, an unflash rhythm thou at bait to turned, but tells way to bait. When the enemy attempted a cunning feint, the bold spectacle army was slow to respond, and the ascetic ranks were too brittle to change. But Kiran's men, rested enough to think and disciplined enough to act, widened the breach with calm efficiency and sealed a critical flank. The warlords' lines, having relied on extremes, found themselves outmaneuvered by steady adaptive measures, and the field that morning learned the difference between might that burns bright for a moment and endurance that outlasts the storm. Kiran stood on the ridge, afterward fear planted, and felt the valley's rill to wad. Then Kiran bowed Kukore. After the clash, the valley smelled of ash and wet earth, and soldiers who had shouted hours before now sat and mended cloaks with slow hands, speaking seldom and looking like different people, and Kiran walked among them with no fanfare, tending wounds when needed and helping repair a child's lost toy as though each act mattered. People began to call him the most reliable warrior, not because he had refused wealth or discipline, but because he learned how to fame required. The valley listened as that small reputation grew into a steadier kind of fame. The Lord of Surplus, who had relied on spectacle, discovered his coin could not buy loyalty when comfort replaced commitment, and the ascetic lord learned that rigid purity could not hold a community together through slow seasons. They both visited Kiran not with offers now, but with questions, and in those meetings they found that his strength lay in proportionate choices. He kept what nourished and let go of what corrupted. He gave rest and demanded craft, and he directed resources where they did the most good, neither hoarding nor wasting them. The lords grudgingly recognized that wisdom had a currency of its own, and they began to change that a harch that call it as if. Years passed, and Kiran's measure became a quiet law among the valley's people. Teach your child to work and to rest. Keep stores that are useful and share what burdens others. Sharpen what protects and repair what binds, and in doing so the valley found it could endure droughts and sieges alike. Kiran's name was spoken as a caution and a blessing, not an idol but a model of applied moderation, and caravans would point to the valley and say that here, balance had become practical armor. He did not claim victories or resilient ways extremes did not sustain. So the riddle the valley asked itself, not with a shout, but with daily choices. The strongest warrior was neither the richest nor the purest, but the one who learned when to spend, when to spare, when to fast and when to feast, and who taught others to do the same. Kiran's life closed like a well-read map, edges softened, but routes still clear, and the valley kept telling his small story, so that others might learn that greed falters and wisdom endures. Remember the soldier who chose the middle path, his service was the valley's steadiness, and his lesson, Bildons Hulets the Valdfurridahake.